Welcome to Diaries of a Data Scientist, our podcast in which we share about what's important to break into data science, provide valuable insights also for senior data scientists, and invite interesting guests from different data science areas. We're Yasmin and Kate, we're both data scientists and mentors working in industry, and we are sharing here our thoughts and experiences. Let's go!
Hi guys, this is Diaries of a Data Scientist with the episode number 22, and today we're recording our next open source for generative AI slot from hot and beautiful Brazil and very much cold, I guess, Germany today.
Cold and rainy, very
Cold and
important
rainy.
addition.
It's even worse than I thought. Maybe a little bit from the intro from our side, why we have been, doing a lot of recent episodes about the Gen.AI, because I guess you remember, as well as I guess our listeners, I hope so, that we did firstly the quarter updates about the all models and packages we do have around the Gen.AI. Then we gently went to the episode number 20 and talked a little bit more about just the open sources on the very high level. Why is that important for the technical people and also for the business side? And today we finally got to talk about the technical part, about the open sources for Gen.AI. And maybe to start with in here, we have prepared for you a little bit of the statistics.
All right. Yeah, there was a super interesting report released by GitHub last November, so almost 1 year back, but I think it still shows the relevance of open source AI. And it's called the Octoverse report. We're also going to link it in the show notes. And it basically says that developers are building more and more also with generative AI projects, and that many of them obviously reuse big proprietary foundation models from OpenAI and other major players, but also open source generative AI projects are growing in popularity, with it even entering the top 10, say, most popular projects just by counting the number of developers and
nice.
contributors to it, which is super nice. And I'm hoping actually that they gonna renew their report this year, so we will also getting some updates on that. And
Cool.
I think what I would love to cover and tell our listeners for today is actually the story around LlaMA. Kate, have you heard this background why LlaMA from Meta is one of the, say, most important open source projects for generative AI?
Honestly, I guess I haven't. And I'm going to be just listening to you as one of our listeners in our podcast. So tell me this story. I'm really super curious about that one.
Perfect. Okay. So LlaMA actually stands for Large Language Model from Meta AI. So from the company that is behind Facebook. And just to also throw in their chief scientist is 𝐾𝐚𝐭𝐚 𝐒𝐜𝐢𝐤, who's one of they considered one of the godfathers also from AI. So they secured the top guy in AI research.
Position.
And LlaMA was actually released in 2023. And since then, basically, academic people could get access to the model and to also even the weight. So there was an application process where you had to be qualified as academic researcher. And I think it was released in February in 2023. And just a couple of weeks later, someone shared it kind of or more or less illegally over a BitTorrent and leaked the weights and the information that you actually had to apply for over this BitTorrent platform. And so it popped up in many, many different projects, also, for example, on Hugging Face. And the first reaction of Meta back then was actually to also sue and trying to take down those leaked projects. And they actually really went also forward with that. But at the time, I mean, once it's out in the open, it's out in the open. You sue. And I think they did something super smart, and that with LlaMA 2 and onwards, they actually, by purpose, were way more transparent with sharing of information about that model and also the weights and the code. So basically, they basically said, okay, they saw that it was making major contributions, LlaMA. So because it was the first time that developers actually had access to the model architecture,
To
the
the-
code, and the weights, which meant
Mhm.
you could host the model yourself, and you could even fine tune it and really do some great stuff with it. And they really, I think, seen that how beneficial that is, but also obviously how popular it was with the contributions. They decided to go
Definitely.
full in and be even more transparent from there on. There is a huge controversy around if you would consider the open source model, honestly. There were hours and hours of readings on Reddit where you could go into the discussion if LlaMA is considered open source or not. Very different, say, takes on it, because one say, okay, as long as they're not sharing the data set behind it, it's not really open source. So because you actually don't really can reproduce it, right? And others say, okay, look, you have the code, you have the weights, you have a paper which is fully describing how this works. How much more do you want it for you, to be transparent?
Yes.
I'm not going to comment on that. I think it's definitely way more freely accessible than many of the other models, right? So that's why we cover it, and also today in the episode.
Yes,
but
definitely.
if you're interested, there's a whole definition on what is open source, which is meeting like 10 different criteria. Just Google for it.
Yes.
Exactly. And we're also going to link it. And if you're interested, check it out. And just a couple, I think 2 weeks back or 1 week back in September, they published version 3.2. Again, with different sizes. And I mean, already in April, Mark Zuckerberg claimed that next year onwards, LlaMA is going to beat all of the proprietary models. So let's see about that.
It's going to be very interesting. Maybe one of the questions that I've been listening to you and wanted to put the clarity for our listeners, you put a lot of emphasis on the weights. Can you just maybe tell them briefly on the very high level for them to understand what that actually means from the model perspective?
Yeah. So the way that I think about it is, I mean, if you have the code, right? The code is telling you how does the network in the end look like? What is the training regime and so on? So it's basically telling you how the house of the model is being built. But in order to fill it with life and to basically capture the learnings that the model has made during the training, you need the weights to each neuron of the neural net, right?
Perfect.
And when I say they basically leak the weights, they basically gave you the information,
the
what is
estimators
the
of the
actual
parameters.
state, exactly, what is the actual parameter state for each of the neurons and other configurations in the net.
Perfect.
Which is actually filling then the house with life, and only then you can use it for inference, that model.
Yeah, definitely. Because pretty much the reason why I'm asking this, I know that not a lot of even experts are working with neural networks or even go beyond that with deep learning. And then in there you need to know all of those vocabulary with the weights and biases and etc. And I just wanted to brought a little bit of light.
I love that.
But I love that as well. It's getting more technical with every single minute.
Yeah, and also to say, I think one aspect to really note out is they usually drop different versions of that model, which have, say, annotations like LlaMA 7B or LlaMA 405B. And what this means is they have different model sizes. And that 405B, for example, stands for 405 billion parameters. So it gives you approximately the size of that model, and it can really vary. So as mentioned, it can go as small as 7 billion parameters, I think. And with these kind of models, it's really also possible to put them on a mobile device, for example, and run like a full large language model on your mobile device. And by doing so, also keeping everything on that device, which is also a security and data protection feature in that sense, right? So we will see way more, say, out of the box mobile generative AI models in the future, and you can already see it in the latest iPhone, Google phone advertisements, right? AI is everywhere.
Yeah, it definitely, especially I guess with the new iOS 18 that we do have in iPhones right now. It looks pretty interesting. But let's go back to the open source topics, because so far we have been talking only about the models, but open source also means the datasets, right? And I guess right now, specifically with, as you mentioned in the very beginning, that with this entire phenomena, I can definitely say, without even knowing numbers, that there has been a lot of research has been going on in the universities and for bachelor and master students that really would love to utilize the open source data sets for such models in order to train them, in order to see how they're performing, and probably even reshape something on that. And maybe we can already go down to the data sets. And I guess it's really going to be important for not only students, but for people who are interested to utilize such data sets in their, let's say, daily job. And the first one is going to be LlaMA-5B. I hope I do pronounce this correctly. And guys, it's actually from open source Lion that we mentioned in episode number 20, talking just about the open source communities in there. And just to give you a brief understanding, so pretty much it is a large-scale data set for research purposes consisting of 5.85 billion clip-filtered image text pairs. And this pretty much data set can be designed for training large-scale gen models, like, for example, those that are using behind DALL-E.
And I think the importance of the data set, as you said, right? It's not just important to have like the model architectures, but if you really want to create entirely new versions and entirely new models yourself, you really need access to large amounts of training data points, right? And for example, just in the textual realm, we're talking about trillions of tokens needed to train models. So
yeah,
and I mean, if you look at Meta, for example, as a company, right? It's really nice that they published now this LlaMA story model, but what they don't publish and what basically nobody really knows is what is the data set which is actually behind it. And that still creates also for businesses, if you're really being super strict on it, right? It still creates a lot of uncertainty because you can't ultimately figure out what kind of biases are inside a model until you have the full picture of the training data set.
Of course.
And I think that's why I love that, say, data sets being open source. I think this is honestly really a neglected area because it's so tedious to collect that vast amounts of data if you're not like Instagram.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess it's also very much connected to the topic of just briefly hyperparameters tuning, because with the Gen.AI models, we also do have fine tuning, which is pretty much when you're taking the pre-trained model and tune it further based on your specific data source. Because as exactly you mentioned, Rusmin, a couple of seconds ago, in order to have those estimators and trust the algorithm and trust the parameters in there, you need to have an access to the data it has been trained on.
Exactly. So the next data set that we would like to cover for you, and I just absolutely love the name, it's called dpile. Pile meaning like a big area where you just collect stuff on, and so it begins to pile up, right? So the pile is the 825 gigabyte diverse open source language modeling dataset, which is exactly basically having those tokens and the kind of textual representations needed to train different kind of language-based models. So it's very, very popular in training text generation models, like also used for chatbots, content creation, and so on. And it's basically a very nicely curated data set for training large language models. So go check it out if you're interested in doing like your own stuff in that area, right? Or if you are in a need to fine-tune something, definitely might be a nice resource.
Yeah, and I also want to point out that it's also one of really nice open source communities, which is called Eleuthero.ai, which was also mentioned in our episode 20. So if you want to be part of this community, and if I'm not mistaken, it is also full of research people in there, please go ahead and check it out. They have an amazing stuff on their website. And we're going to finish this, let's say, part of the open source data sets with the C4. You know, Yasmin, I don't know why, but today I got really weird names that I honestly cannot pronounce. So C4, which is pretty much pronounced as 𝐶𝐚𝐭𝐚 corpus, and it's for the context summation and a natural language understanding.
I could swear like 20% of the time of a researcher is going into finding creative names for their outputs and deliverables. Otherwise, I couldn't explain how these kind of namings can come to life. It sounds like a super nice data set also to use. So go check it out. Very, very popular. And
Yes.
before we go on with like telling you more about different open source models in the text generation realm, so not the data set, but the actual models, we wanted to also give you some information about benchmarking, because you can see already from just the episodes that we did, the amount of different models out there is massive. So how would you decide
Yes.
what is the best model for your own use, right?
Right.
So I think which is really important is that there are leaderboards and there are benchmarks. And a leaderboard is usually like a scoreboard where the best ranking model is on top. You can see usually a score point connected to that, and then from there it goes down to say the worst performing model. But what is really
Yes.
important to know, there are very different kind of leaderboards out there, right? And there's not this one standard leaderboard that everyone is using. There are different publishers, like for example on Hugging Face, but there are many different other pages also providing their own leaderboards. And the second thing is, what are the models ranked on? So usually what they are ranked on in those leaderboards are benchmarking sets. And I think here the community does a little bit better job, because there are definitely like the, say, handful of most popular benchmark exercises on that these models are compared against on. And just to give you a few ideas, for example, there's a benchmark set or benchmark exercise for multitask reasoning from the MMLU benchmark, and it's testing general capabilities of inference and reasoning of these models. And the latest model from OpenAI, for example, which was claimed to be like the best one in almost human-like reasoning, right? It's really also performing the best on this benchmark. Another benchmark is to test the maths capabilities, and it's on arithmetic reasoning, and it's called the math benchmark. And the last one I wanted to state out is there's also a benchmark on how good those models can code and program. And it's from the human eval benchmark. So basically, which is showing, okay, this is human performance on coding task. And then they let a model do the same kind of task, and they compare it against the human performance.
Perfect. Interesting.
So just to give you like the idea, right? And then the second aspects you have to consider is, Kate, if you want to create a new project, right? You have a very clear picture in mind. What is the kind of capabilities you need from a model? Does it need to be fast? Does it need to be super small so it can fit on a device? Does it need to be super inexpensive because your customer cannot afford a lot, right?
Yes.
So these are the kind of criteria that you also need to figure out. What do you need for your situation? Do you need like the performance in terms of like how fast, how many tokens it can process, the latency of how fast it is reacting, or like for example the price, which is usually compared in US dollars per million tokens.
And here I might have hearing whispers from my business stakeholders, asking what is actually the benefit from using the open source models for a company, and probably specifically if it is a large enterprise where, let's say, data is strictly classification, you're not allowed to share anything, as well as you're really much not allowed to use anything which is like freely located out there on the internet. What would you say to these people having such misconceptions about the open source models?
Yeah. So I think the question behind that question is actually, why would you want to use open source when there's like known vendors out there with
Definitely
probably with whom you're anyway working with already, right? And I think it's really not the discussion of either or, so either fully going with vendors versus fully going open source. It's really about the mixture. But usually the benefits that are provided to you as an organization for in using open source generative AI, as it gives you like basically almost the highest degree of controllability and control that you can have over like how you want to use the models, how you want to adapt the models.
if you
here
want to
again,
change
it's
the parameters.
exactly. It's very important that you again check the licenses with which these models come, because also there it's maybe a little bit of controversy between, for example, the Apache license versus the MIT license, right? And how far they go in terms of what kind of uses are actually
Yes.
allowed. So I think why maybe open source seems to be a little bit more scary to some people is, I think that you as an organization, you have to consider more aspects, and you have to have, you have to take more time into actually checking it out and knowing what you want. And it sounds a little bit more complicated than just going with one of the standard vendors and just accepting whatever they have. But if you as an organization, if you need that high level of control, open source is honestly the way to go. Another big benefit, as you said, right, the data security. If I could run the models and just host them in my own infrastructure, if I could put them on mobile devices, right, it gives you like the control over how is the data being processed. And at least to some extent, I mean, usually your data center would probably also not be a fully on-premise data center, right? But it gives you, again, a high level of control also of the data that is being processed.
And I guess probably here we have, as far as I understand by my experience, we have a lot of misconceptions and a lot of rumors going on that if you have any models hosted from the open sources, that it means that your data pretty much is leaking. This is at least what arguments I have heard from the business people. But let's just say that for the first and for the last time, that you can host your models locally, and that is why your data is going to be protected.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So the open source is not to be misunderstood as like the data that you process with it is otherwise like afterwards open. That's definitely not the case. So thank you for clearing up that misconception, Kate. Yeah, and I think a not to be neglected aspect or like a benefit is definitely the cost effectiveness, right? I mean, I need to host it myself. I need to have people who are educated enough and have the expertise to be able to deal with it and really also take like leverage of it. But if then like I'm in full control of the costs behind it, and which is not the case if I have to rely on one of the standard providers and they're like deciding from one day to the other to increase the token prices by 20%.
Yes.
I'm locked in. So this is the vendor locked in is also like another aspect, right? And I have to accept those prices more or less if I still want to have that service running, which is not the case with open source.
And you have a very, let's say, weak negotiation position in this sense.
Exactly. So with open source, at least what you don't have to pay, right? I mean, you still have to host the models, you have the infrastructure. This is not coming for free naturally, right? But you don't have to pay basically the profit of another company and everything that's connected to it.
Yeah, and maybe just to summarize it a little bit, so we have, let's say, 3 major benefits. The first, you can control the parameters, the estimators, the hyperparameters tuning if you do use the open source models. B, your data is secured once you're hosting this locally on the premises. And C, which is a really nice advantage, like for the business side, it's not going to be that costly and you're not going to be dependent on one single vendor in this sense.
Exactly. Nice summary.
Thank you so much. And that is, what do you think? So what is the most, let's say, popular nowadays Gen.AI use case? Is that, I don't know, voice to text? Is that images? Are those creating texts and etc.? What is your experience in this sense?
Oh, really tough question. So I think the still most widespread use is kind of text to text. So textual request or prompt in, textual output out. But we see the rise of multimodality, for example, with the GPT-4o model, right? Where you can input either text, video, image, and can get out either text, image, or video, or like any combination in between. And I think it's coming more. But I think in many organizations, it's still the case that people are still getting used to having those AI assistants and chatbots around, right? So I think their text-to-text is still somewhat like the base use case. But I do expect the rise of the multimodality come there as well, because it's also how we work, right? So if I look at chats that I have with my coworkers, for example, it's a very good mixture of text, but also like
GIFs.
screenshots that I'm sharing there, and just
Mm-hmm.
yeah, memes, of course, Kate, also
Definitely.
memes. No, but just thinking about, right, if you have like a task to solve, it's usually
Mm-hmm.
also the case that you have some sort
A
of
mixture.
visual representation.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. So I do
Perfect.
see that coming.
Mm-hmm. Then I guess we can definitely start right now talking about really interesting open source models in those two areas, which is going to be text to text and also text to the image.
Mm-hmm.
And let's maybe start right now with GPT-NO/GPT-G by our beloved open source community 𝐿aMA, and just give you kind of briefly understanding that it's open source, like as an alternative to the OpenAI GPT, providing access to the large language models without restrictions, making it one of the most popular open source large language models. And maybe just the off topic here, why we're even talking about different models instead of just maybe pointing out one as a benchmark and just go ahead with this one, because I believe that we're all, as data scientists, primarily maybe in this sense as researchers, we want to try out different models, different performance. And we also know that for different tasks, different models are going to be performing better. So
Yeah,
what else do we
nice.
have?
Yeah, the next one is actually from Mistral AI. It was already, yeah. It sounds so far away, but it was actually published in December 2023, and it's called Mixtral A times 7B, and it's a mixture of expert model.
Yes.
And that is such a nice idea, which is like actually taking place in many other areas in AI as well, right? That instead of just using a single model, which is, you know, your sole predictor for a task, you're having like an ensemble and a bunch of models working together, and you know, in that sense, like each of the models is their own expert, and together they come to like a common conclusion around the question. And I just love that concept so much. And basically the Mixtra model is putting that into action for large language models. It's super nice.
Yes.
It's licensed under the Apache 2.0 license, so it's also safe and allowed to be used for commercial use, for example. And it's super versatile across different text generation tasks. And yeah, they even also give out different variants which are optimized for code, optimized for instructions, and so on. So definitely something worthy to check out.
And the next one, I guess this is something that it's definitely going to be, at least from my side and from my projects, one of the first to try on the next week, which is called Blue, Big Science, Large Open Science, Open Access Multilingual Language Model. And that was like a poem. So pretty much, why is that so nice, and why I'm really eager to try that out and go ahead with this one? Because it's designed to understand and generate text in multiple languages. So I don't know, Yasmir, how was that for you or for perhaps our listeners? But I found it sometimes really tricky to make even ChatGPT to really be concise with different languages. And I do definitely find sometimes, while translating from, let's say, Spanish to English or from English to Portuguese right now, I do see some blank space in there. So I'm really interested to try out this specific one. And just a brief information that it was created by 1,000 plus researchers and trained on 384 GPUs.
Yeah, and I think it's so worthy to point out, right? Because 384 doesn't sound much compared to like the resources Google or like a Microsoft has, right? But remembering it's open source, and many different kind of researchers from many different institutes like working together for that, I think that's still like a big thing. And funding is always a topic, right, of open
Yes,
source
of course.
projects. So I think that's definitely like something worthy to note here. Nice. So the next one that we wanted to highlight is T5. It's a text-to-text transfer transformer. So that's why like 5 T's. And it's one of the most versatile models, mostly used in the areas of question answering and machine translation. So maybe what you just pointed out again, Kate, with like seeing some lack of quality English to Portuguese, maybe T5 is something that you could try out for yourself, right?
And I guess the final model in this section is going to be our beloved LlaMA, large language model meta AI that you, Yasmin, I guess you had a really interesting story today behind it. And we do have a lot of versions available. I think that we're not going to go through all of them right now. Just stating out that we do have the last one just to be released in September 25th. And it's going to be LlaMA 3.2. And let's just me briefly go through some parameters. It has 1 billion, 3 billion, 11 billion, and 90 billions different parameters for 4 different versions.
Yeah, so I was even mistaken before in saying 7 billion is like the lowest what we've seen in the LlaMA family. See, now it actually goes down to even 1 billion parameter, which is a super comparably small size for a large language model. And I think the art would be to have such a smaller size, but still like a reasonably high performance, right? That's what I think what we're striving for. We've seen from a time it was like models getting larger and larger, and vendors competing in the size of the parameters. But I think for me, the bigger achievement is actually in scaling down the model size and still making reasonable performances possible.
I can see the trend to be right now the opposite one, that our companies trying to create small language models, so aka SLMs. And probably for the next episode, we can definitely try to bring this topic up to our listeners to talk a little bit about a comparison of LLMs and SLMs as well.
Exactly. That's what I meant. I think there has been a shift in the research area again to go down to smaller models, which I personally I definitely agree with.
Yes, for sure.
Nice. So that is covering like our text area, so large language models. Let's take a look at the image area, which is not to be neglected here. And I think the one model that definitely pops up immediately in my head in the area of open source is Stable Diffusion, which really triggered this whole image generation, nice AI images trajectory. So Stable Diffusion, it's actually not a single model, but it's combining multiple models and methods into a more or less stable and controlled manner. And just to give also a little bit of background here, the whole area, it's called diffusion models. And the way that these diffusion models work is they start with like a completely noisy image, like they just start with noise, and then over each iteration. Basically the noise is changed into the image over like by each step. So it's like diffusing information into the model, which is super also amazing concept. It has been downloaded over 5 million times, so the Stable Diffusion based apps, and it really also creators are generating hundreds of millions of images based on these kind of models monthly. It's really insane. And it's covering, as maybe you already know, both like the photorealistic images, but you can also, for example, do any kind of style of imaging, right? So you could even say, a style like specific painters, which is also like a huge controversy, right? Because again, here, what is the actual data collection these models are being trained on? And what about like the actual also IP of artists creating these styles, which is maybe flowing into models? And the very nice thing here, you cannot just only give texture prompts, but you can even prompt with an image to say like, give me another image which has a similar style here.
And I guess you just have touched a really nice and ethical question about the data sets that this model has been trained on in order to be able to differentiate between the noise and with each iteration go and, let's say, classify and see different pictures and different objects represented in there.
Yeah.
This may be a point to think.
Exactly. And I think we have the same controversy also in text area, but it's just more visual in images that people, I think, can more immediately see and detect, oh, this is actually like a style which is similar to mine. I think in text it's way way less obvious in many
Yeah.
areas. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And this kind of points me to, guys, membrace you that we do have an amazing episode about how to distinguish between what is fake and what is true. And I guess it was in our previous episodes back in the beginning in this year, highly also recommended for you to go ahead and check it out, because you will see, I guess, really nice tips and how you definitely detect this part.
Absolutely. And if you're interested
Yes.
in how diffusion models work, I can really
Mm-hmm.
recommend the courses on Deep Learning Academy. And they have a super nice course also on diffusion models, where you can see also this, like how from each iteration to another iteration, an image is being produced out of like the noise
Nice.
version. And it's really, really
Nice.
nice. So can fully recommend that.
Perfect. And do you remember how long it lasts? Like
Do you
a
mean the
couple of
course?
months? Yes. Do you remember?
I mean, no,
Do you know?
it's really like a super, like a micro course, I would even say. It's like
Oh,
a
okay.
1 hour learning about
Okay.
stable diffusion with some also nice Jupyter notebooks that you can actually try out and change yourself. So really
Oh,
big
perfect.
recommendation.
Nice. Because usually when I'm hearing kind of about courses about such models, I would definitely imagine something about a couple of weeks to go to the math to really understand.
No, it's I think more pragmatic, hands-on course. It's like not
Perfect.
going into the depth.
Nice, nice. Okay, then let's head over to the next one, which was actually inspired by the OpenAI DALL-E model, and it is called DALL-E Mini, and it was created for the just casual users, which is really nice because I guess if you will go to the DALL-E website, you're allowed just to generate one model without paying for this one, and every single...
I think at least it's limited
Yeah, it is
number of
limited.
generations. Yeah.
Yes. Yep. Perfect.
Yeah, so definitely, and I mean it's a mini version, right? So probably you shouldn't expect the same level of performance and quality, right? But at least that's something that you can try out yourself, and you can also look into how it's like into its inner workings. Yeah, and the next one, it's also a little bit more recent one. It's a Flux One from the Black Forest Labs, actually originated here in Germany. And not like the Black Forest is actually pretty close also to where both Kate and me are actually located in Germany. So it's super interesting. So Flux One, it's from the Black Forest Labs, and the Black Forest Lab was actually founded by the original founders from the Stable Diffusion. So they left the former institute, founded their own institute. In the meanwhile, I think they got major funding from the US. So they are not, I think, fully German-based anymore. But with their Flux model, so they had a kind of new state-of-the-art suite of image generation models, and they're really setting new like benchmarks also in that area. And they have 3 different variants of models, which they call Pro, Dev, and Schnell. And Schnell meaning fast in German. And
this is how you understand that I was from German, guys.
Absolutely. And they put different limits also regarding the licensing and what and how far commercial use is allowed with these different versions. So definitely something to consider. And it achieved over 1.5 million downloads in Hugging Face in a very short amount of time. So that is super, super big because the first 3 places are covered by Stable Diffusion, and now in 4th place it's actually the Black Forest Lab model Flux One.
Nice.
Yeah, so I think with this actually we can wrap up that area also of image generation models. And there would have been so many more areas we could give you insights on, like also audio and speech and what to use for fine-tune. We will definitely also create something out of that content we captured there, maybe a blog post or another post on LinkedIn. But we thought, okay, for this episode, let's focus on the data sets, the text generation area, and the image generation area, and to give you some more context around open source generative AI. We hope you liked episode 22, and thank you for listening in to Diaries of a Data Scientist. Have a good day.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
This was Diaries of a Data Scientist by Yasmin and Kate. And if you enjoyed the episode, remember to check out our YouTube channel and our LinkedIn pages for more engaging content from the data science world. Thank you for today, and seeing you in the comments.